Hello. Okay, so here we are to cover our last chapter for the class. Chapter 19 has to do with launch management. So we have launched our product, but guess what? We're not really done. However you might like to think you are, you really aren't, because you don't have a successful launch until you've met the objectives of your associated with your product, your new product concept, and the goals that you set for that product. And so chapter 19 is all about managing the details around tracking the success of your launch to make sure that you're meeting the objectives that you've set for the product. And so kind of as an overview to this conversation, there are some certain things you're kind of on the lookout for when you launch a new product. And we call these 5 elements of the gap analysis matrix. And so these are just things to keep an eye open for because they are warning signs, really, red flags. So if you can tell from your launch management system, which we'll get into here in a few minutes, that you miss the mark with respect to the window of opportunity to capitalize on this new product concept. That's a big deal. So you want to be looking for that. If you can tell that you've lost executive support for your effort, or it's just waning in some way, you're kind of on the lookout for that, because the support of your executive management is very, very important. So you want to make sure that that's solid. If you are seeing that your business case for this product concept, in other words, the profitability or the business analysis that was done related to this product concept, if you can see you're not meeting those metrics with your launch, then you've got an issue to be looking for. If you can see that you haven't adequately prepared for the sales channel for marketing your product with respect to training, promotion activities, anything related to being ready to actually sell this product, you've got an issue there too. And finally, if your team isn't working well together to be coordinated in its activities and to be working together to successfully complete this launch, then you've got an issue there too. Those then are the 5 elements of the gap analysis matrix. All right, so if you are going to put together a launch management system, then there are particular steps in the process, and I'll just go over them quickly here, and then we'll talk about each of them. So when you launch a new product, you're on the lookout for problems. Okay, so you need to first identify what those problems might be. And then based on what those problems might be, you need to decide which ones you're going to focus on to try to control or at least monitor. And then the third step in the process then is, if you can see that you've got a problem with your launch, one of the control issues or items that you are choosing to track has shown itself to actually be an issue, then you need to have some kind of a contingency plan in place so that you know what to do if a problem comes up. And then finally, you need to have some kind of a tracking system that allows you to track what you were expecting to happen versus what is happening. So fundamentally, for each of these 4 points, we're dealing with issues that you can track, and we're dealing with issues that you can control. So those are kind of like prerequisites to the process here. You've got to have those 2 things in order to have an effective launch management system. All right, so dealing with the first point here, spotting potential problems. You are identifying the problems that you may have before you ever launch the product. And so, in other words, we're planning for problems, okay? So this means you're trying to figure out what those problems may be before you ever have them. And so how do you figure out what those are? You can go back and look at prior concept testing or use testing to see what sorts of things popped out there that look like they could be potential problems. You could be working with your situation analysis information and research to give you some ideas there. You could work with the ATAR model as far as Working backwards, so if you know you want this market share and it's dependent on this level of awareness and this level of availability and this level of trial purchases and this level of repeat purchases, you can use those individual pieces of the puzzle and figure out what you have to have for each of those in order to make for a successful market share with the launch of your product. And then if you miss the mark on any of those 4 areas, those could be potential control points for you that you could track and monitor. All right. And finally, one good thing to do is to think through what happens if you're too successful. If the demand is too high, what does that do to your production facility? Can you keep up with that demand? Does your channel have the capacity to support the demand that's much higher than you anticipated? So that's another potential source of a problem for you to try to track. All right, so based on that sort of brainstorming of potential problems, you need to identify the ones that you're going to actually track. Okay, so you don't want to have too many. Less than 6 is a good rule of thumb. And you need to be thinking through the ones that are most important. And so some problems will cause you trouble, and some problems will actually absolutely destroy you. And so you want to try to find or try to guess, I guess, or use an educated guess to figure out which problems are going to give you the most trouble, are going to be the most impactful. In other words, if you can figure out what those issues are and find a way to track for them or watch for them, that's a better launch management system than little baby problems that aren't going to give you much trouble at all. All right. Potholes will cause you trouble. Sinkholes will absolutely undo you. And so the problem there is that potholes you can generally track, plan around. Sinkholes tend to hit you like a freight truck or a freight train, and you don't really know it's coming. And so they're harder to plan for. All right. Number 3 in our launch management system, step 3. This is the phase where we're developing contingency plans based on problems. So if this happens, what are we going to do? Most of the time, or most frequently with a product launch, distribution becomes the point of friction or the point of where there's an issue in the launch. Not having adequate promotion through the channel, not having good display of your product as far as shelf position or visibility on the shelves in the stores, maybe not having adequate incentive for your resellers to push your product, that kind of thing. So that's a good place to look for potential problems and to think through what are you going to do if you experience a problem here. Finally, you've got to come up with your actual tracking system. So you're identifying based on your trigger points. Well, let me back up. You've got tracking variables. These are the items you're actually going to track that would represent a potential problem. And then you've got a trigger point, which is a threshold that is crossed that tells you, okay, we got to do something. So you got to have those two things, and you've got to be able to track what you expect to happen versus what actually is happening. And so you've got to have a way to have data available to you that shows you what actually is happening. So if, for example, if you are expecting a certain level of awareness, you need a way to know if you've got that level of awareness or not. And so that requires you to do something in order to collect that information and then to be able to plot it against what you expected to have happen. Number 4 here, non-trackable problems. This is just making the point that you're likely to be dealing with issues that you can't track. And so while they could be substantial, could be very impactful, there's not much you can do about them. And so those are not where you should put your focus. You need to put your focus to the things that you can track and just try to make them as relevant as possible to what would create a successful or an unsuccessful product launch. All right, so let me give you an example. So let's say over time, we are collecting information from consumers about how aware they are of our product. And so down here at this end of the scale, we've collected 1,000 points of information from consumers, and up here we have 5,000 points of information. So there is a time element here. There's also an increase in the amount of data that we have. And so what we're anticipating is that awareness should go up in the minds of consumers with more points of information that we've been able to collect. So we have a trajectory of awareness that we are expecting. That's this solid line. And then all these little dotted lines in here are points of information that we've collected. So what I wanted to be sure was clear here is that you actually have to be collecting that information. You have to have a way to get that information from consumers. And so you may have a group of people that's out in the shopping mall asking people, here, I'm going to just point out this question here. Do you recall seeing any advertising for this brand? Describe the advertising that you saw for this brand. So based on these questions that you're asking consumers, you're going to be able to establish a certain amount or a certain level of awareness, and you can track that compared to what you anticipated having. All right, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so here's a sample launch management plan to kind of pull all these pieces together. So potential problem number one, salespeople are failing to contact general purpose market at the prescribed rate. And so here's our tracking variable. We're going to track weekly call reports, and the plan, according to our plan, we would have salespeople calling 10 general purpose sorts of customers per week, per rep. And so you can track that. It's a variable you can track, and it's relevant to the success of your product. And so if you're tracking that and those salespeople are not meeting those goals, then you have a contingency plan that says, if they're not meeting those goals, we need some kind of a remedial program with our district salespeople to talk about this. Okay, so that's your contingency plan. And there's several other examples for you to look at here. All right, so at the end of a product launch, there is something called an AAR, or an after action review, which basically just says, here's what we wanted to do, here's what we actually did, where did we go off course, just as a way for your own team and your own capabilities as a marketing function to do a good job with this, so that you look back and you see, what did we do well, what did we not do so well, what should we do differently in the future. So that's what this is all about. All right, so let's have a little conversation here about the metrics that would be used to evaluate a successful new product launch. So a team may be looking at input metrics, which have to do with how much money they've spent on R&D, how many projects they're putting through the pipeline, that kind of thing. Process metrics might have more to do with looking at average time to market. So how long did it take you to process this new product concept? How many new product concepts did you effectively bring to market? That sort of thing. Performance metrics are more based on at the end of the process, what was your investment in innovation? What was your ROI? What was your market share? What was your customer satisfaction? What was your break-even time as far as sales? That kind of thing. So this is just kind of a laundry list of metrics that are candidates for evaluating a successful product launch. Sometimes your useful metrics, or metrics that might be particularly meaningful, might be soft metrics, like maybe you track how often somebody in your distribution channel needed you to come and help them, how many questions they had. Those kinds of things could tell you a lot about how prepared you were able to make your channel as far as being ready to launch a product. A good point here to remember is that you don't want to have too many things to track, because it just slows you down. There's a phrase, paralysis by analysis, where if you're spending too much time analyzing every little thing, you tend to not get as much done. So there's a good balance there to be had. All right. And so I'm going to move on from this conversation and just to close chapter 19, consider what happens if you actually have a product that fails, a new product concept that fails. So there's even a process that happens with this. So just to follow the chart here that I've presented for you, and this is in the book too, there's a point where you recognize you've got a failed product. So what do you do with that? You need to be thoughtful about what it does to your market and what it does to your company if you pull that product off the market. Does it impact your competitive position in a way that makes it worth keeping that product, even if it's not meeting its goals? Is there a usage base existing in the market that needs support for that product so that you can't just pull it off the market? Maybe that product concept or that new product has some worth that you haven't thought through. Maybe you could sell that product to a different company that could benefit more from it than your company was able to. And you could make a lot of money off of that sort of a sale. Or maybe you've been able to, at this point, see something that tells you, this could still be a good idea. We just need to do X to make it work. And so you might have to go back to the drawing board a little bit, and it might be worth it to do that, to tweak this product and relaunch it, for example. All right. So whatever you decide to do out of that analysis sort of a phase, you then are at a stage where you need to actually do whatever it is you need to do related to that product failure. And again, it might be a situation where there's still value in it, that if you work it right, it could even end up being a benefit for your company in the end. Okay, so with that, I'm going to close out for chapter 19. I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your week, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.